He was a Miami attorney who was perhaps the P.T. Barnum of lawyers, and for a time in South Florida, he handled every headline-grabbing arrest or cause to come down the Florida Turnpike. He capitalized on the flamboyant characters and outrageous crimes that grow here like palm trees and iguanas. His legal defenses were clever, outrageous, unprecedented, and highly, shall I say, innovative. His tactics were often controversial, and a Judge Wayne Cobb characterized him as a lawyer famous for psychobabble defenses. The judge then ruled against the accused. This is the tale of Ellis Rubin and the cases that made South Florida famous. Cue the music.
These are the tales from South Florida for you, with your host, Bill Monty.
If you've lived in South Florida a while, then the name Ellis Rubin is one that you're very familiar with, especially if you were living here in the 1970s. Ellis Rubin was a South Florida attorney who gained national fame for handling a variety of highly publicized cases in a career that spanned over 50 years. Now, I'm going to start this whole story out by saying one thing. There were people who thought he was a showboater, that he was just in it for the limelight. I liked Ellis Rubin. I didn't know him. I never met him. I only knew him through the causes that he fought for and the stories that were on the news and TV. But it seemed to me that if you were someone who really needed an attorney, one who wasn't afraid to try every single thing they possibly could to get you out of the jam that you were in, Ellis Rubin was the guy you wanted. Certainly would have been the guy that I wanted if I'd been in a jam back then. Now, in light of what we know about lawyers and attorneys today and how things are done and how much we see on TV, today he wouldn't seem to stand out that much. But back when he first started coming to prominence, that was a different story. People weren't used to it. Our mind's eye of attorneys was Perry Mason and whatever lawyer show happened to be on television at that time. Lawyers didn't really make big stories. Sometimes, if they handled cases like the Chicago 7 trial, certainly during the Watergate era, some of the lawyers became famous. But we weren't used to grandstanding. We wouldn't see it again until the O.J. Simpson trial. And probably what Ellis Rubin did kind of set the stage for what happened during that trial. Ellis Rubin won the first case in Florida using what is now called the battered woman defense. He worked to free a man who had been wrongly imprisoned for 21 years and accused of poisoning his children. He created the nymphomania defense in a case involving prostitution. He originated the idea that television was such a horrible influence that watching it caused a South Florida teenager to murder his 83-year-old neighbor. I remember that case well. Ronnie Zamora. When he defended 15-year-old Ronnie Zamora back in, I'm going to say it was 1977 or 78, for the murder of his 83-year-old neighbor down in Miami Beach, Zamora was in the act of robbing the house, got caught, murdered the neighbor, took the money that he stole in that robbery, and went to Disney World. The trial that followed was one of the first that was ever shown nationally on television. And Zamora's defense was that he was intoxicated by violence on TV. It became known as TV intoxication defense. He claimed he could not tell the difference between fantasy and reality because of his obsession with a show that was called Kojak, Who Loves You, Baby, and other violent shows on TV since the age of 5. Ellis Rubin tried unsuccessfully to provide evidence of the damaging effect of television shows on the minds of teenagers and children, and he even went so far as to issue a subpoena to actor Telly Savalas, who was the star of Kojak, and to other experts on the relationship between violence and television. It didn't work. Ronnie Zamora was convicted. He was sentenced to life. He unsuccessfully appealed his sentence, and he blamed Ellis Rubin for the TV intoxication defense, which he claimed had made a joke of his trial. There was no way to get this young man off. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he had murdered this woman. By the way, as follow-up, Ronnie Zamora was released from prison in 2004 after having served 27 years in prison, and he was extradited back to his home country. Another famous case that Ellis Rubin took on, and these names might also, if you remember, mean something to you. This was in the early 90s, and it was the case of Catherine and Jeffrey Willits, or as she became known, Kathy Willits and Jeff Willits. The Willitses were accused of operating a sex business out of their home. Folks, if you weren't around, this was huge news at the time. Rubin argued in their defense that Kathy Willits was driven to prostitution by nymphomania, which was all brought on because of the antidepressant medicine Prozac, and that forced her to need sex with as many as 8 men daily. Now get this, her husband was a deputy sheriff, Broward sheriff. He was impotent, it was claimed, he later denied that, and he would hide in the closet and videotape his wife having sex as a form of therapy. I know you're not going to believe this, but both people were convicted of the crimes they were accused of. Prosecutors said that Kathy Willits entertained 107 men over 5 months in her master bedroom of her home, earning as much as $2,000 a week. A lot of money back then. Hey, a lot of money right now. It was the end of the career of Vice Mayor Doug Danziger, who had led a morality crusade against stripper bars, getting them to close down, and he resigned for personal reasons after it was revealed that he was on one of those videotapes. Again, it's kind of funny how time passes by. Would this really be such a big story now? I know it ruined, they obviously went to prison. It ruined both of their lives. And yes, absolutely wrong what they did. It's against the law for some bizarre reason to actually pay a woman to have sex. Certainly against the law in Florida to videotape anyone without their permission. So that was a big problem, and that's probably why I believe that he went to prison. I think she served a little bit of time, but then, no pun intended, got off early. Needless to say, though, this was again one of the crimes that kept Ellis Rubin in the headlines for the entire time that he was practicing. There were a lot of other cases which we don't have time to go into. One of them was Ellis Rubin actually supported Anita Bryant's anti-gay crusade in the 1970s, but he later said that was a mistake. He filed a lawsuit in federal court under the Defense of Marriage Act to attain recognition of a lesbian couple's Canadian marriage. But one of the cases that maybe all of us need to be the most thankful for, and this is why I like him, if you don't recall, there was a time when college football games and the NFL games were blacked out. You couldn't watch them on TV if you lived in the area within 75 miles of the stadium in which the game was played. I talked about this in the episode that I did about the perfect season for the Miami Dolphins. But it was Ellis Rubin who first fought to lift the blackout in the Orange Bowl game, the college game that was played every year right around New Year's Eve. And what he did was, in order to make his point, he jogged the distance, 75 miles between Miami, the stadium where the Orange Bowl was, to Palm Beach, Florida, gathering signatures on petitions for presentation to the city of Miami politicians and commissioners in the hope that they would voluntarily lift the blackout of the Orange Bowl game. That didn't work, at least not at first. But eventually, through public pressure and media attention, the Orange Bowl committee agreed to voluntarily lift the blackout back in 1970. Well, this just lit the fire under Mr. Rubin. Now that he had won an impossible victory, he set his sights on the NFL and Pete Rozelle, who was the commissioner of the NFL at that time. He unsuccessfully fought to lift TV blackouts in New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Miami before he was able to bring the issue before Congress in the form of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Pretty clever, if you think about it. What he did was he teamed up with Senator William Proxmire. Senator Proxmire was the chairman of the Antitrust Committee. He loved the Washington Redskins. He couldn't get a ticket to the games because back then you just couldn't get Redskin tickets. You had to inherit them, basically. And really wanted to find a way and someone who could help him lift the blackout so he could watch his beloved Redskins play. Together, they were able to bring pressure on Pete Rozelle and the other owners of the NFL and created what became known as the 72-hour blackout rule. The 72-hour blackout rule was if the game sold out 72 hours before kickoff, then it could be shown locally. We used to pray for sellouts. Come on, sell out. He had to file over a dozen lawsuits against the NFL and various NFL teams. And in the end, maybe because of his work, maybe not, I think it was about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, TV blackouts were eventually lifted. Ellis Rubin died at his Miami home after battling cancer. He was 81 years old. He left an indelible mark on South Florida, on the country, on jurisprudence, and I just think he was one of the most colorful and one of the great characters, and certainly one of the most interesting tales from South Florida. I want to remind you to please go ahead, if you enjoyed this episode or any of the episodes from Tales from South Florida, please hit that like button or the thumbs up, depending on what you're listening to this on. Be sure to make a comment. I love to read your comments, no matter what they are. Please share with your family and friends. If you didn't like it, share it with your enemies. And hit that subscribe button. I do so appreciate it. It helps us keep the podcast going. We're approaching 30 episodes now. If you had told me that back in January when it started, I would have laughed at you. But I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun with it too. Until the next time that we take a talk down memory lane together and enjoy another of the Tales from South Florida, this is Bill Monty reminding you to please be safe and be kind. My friends, I want to thank you also for staying with me to the end of the program. The way the podcasts work is that platforms such as Apple and Amazon and Spotify, they reward podcasters if the listeners stay until the end of the episode. And what they do is they then push it out to more and more new listeners so that your podcast can get discovered. Podcasts are not like radio or television shows. They work on algorithms, and frankly, it's all a mystery. So every time that you listen all the way to the end, like you're doing right now, well, I just want to thank you because you're helping me and you're helping the podcast. It is appreciated. Also, what's appreciated are your comments and thoughts. You can text me directly by just scrolling down whatever platform you're listening to and send me a message. Is a link. You click on that, you'll be able to just text me. It won't cost you anything like when you text on the phone. And it lets me know the things that you're liking or not liking about the podcast and about the show. Please take a moment to do that. I do so appreciate it. Remember, like, comment, share, subscribe. And again, until next time, be safe and be kind.
These are the tales from South Florida for you. With your host, Bill Monty.